Welcome to this recorded session on failures and flops. Tell us how assessment went horribly wrong and what you learned from it. So, in this session, I think I scared a few people off because not too many folks were willing to come and talk about failures in assessment. And I think it's really important that we do that because every time we engage in attempting to improve student learning, sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. But everything that we do, whether it works or doesn't, we can learn from. In fact, one of the things I really like about this new plan, do, study, act model that we're using is in that last piece, that act. One of the questions you're asked about is, once you've acted, are you going to adopt what you did? Are you going to adapt what you did? Or are you going to abandon what you did because it simply didn't work? So in this very short presentation, what I want to do is share 3 of my own failures and flops to help normalize the fact that it is completely acceptable to have failures and flops in assessment. So failure and flop number 1, assessment day. The recordings didn't work. So here I am and everybody else is recording their live sessions because although I tried to set it up ahead of time and it seemed to be fine, the day of, the wonderful recordings had a terrible echo to all of them. And so that was definitely a failure and a flop. But the benefit is some good things came out of it. I'll tell you what things came out of it. And number 1, so maybe it's not as exciting just to be hearing one person speak as instead of seeing the interaction between those who came to the event. But the sessions are a little bit shorter. So there's a bonus for you. The other thing about it was one of the sessions I was most excited about was our opening session with all of our college leadership talking about how they fit into assessment and how they saw their teams fitting into assessment. And because that session didn't work, I have asked all of them to record just a short little own video on it. And we're going to release those videos in a series where we can all kind of see them and take advantage of them. And then the other thing is, if we all have these individual videos, then we can target those people on our teams directly with that video. So I'm going to take that little recording failure and flop and think it actually worked out pretty darn well. Although for the next assessment day, I'm going to have this sorted out because I'm going to go to the CTLE and get help. Okay, that's failure and flop number 1. Failure and flop number 2 is research methods. So I taught research methods for years, and like many of you, I never really had any formal training in assessment. I went through, a graduate program where I learned all about psychology content, but I really didn't learn about assessment. In fact, some of our folks who are best trained in assessment have come through the K-12 system more than the higher education system. And certainly those of you who are not in the instructional side of the house really probably don't know much about assessment. Anyway, but I thought maybe I knew about assessment, and I was co-teaching one semester research methods with Fernando Romero. And Fernando Romero had come from the K-12 system, and he was also an educational psychologist. And I'm lecturing one day, and he's like, "Where are your student learning outcomes?" And I'm like, "My what?" And he said, "What is it that you want students to be learning from this lecture?" And I said, "Well, duh, like the stuff in the lecture." And he said, "But what are those things?" And it was a real epiphany for me because I realized I should be telling students what it is I'm expecting them to get out of that learning experience. And this can be in a classroom, in a program, in an activity, in a student organization, any place where students are learning, academic affairs, student affairs, even administrative services, where appropriate, we should be telling students what our goal is for them to attain in that setting. And as a result of Fernando asking me that question, I went back to all of my lectures and I wrote student learning outcomes for each lecture. Then I actually used them as the model for the lecture. So I'd say, okay, here's what we're going to cover first. And then we would cover it. Then I say, okay, everybody good with this? Do we need to talk about it anymore? If they were all good, we would move to the next one. And so we just moved through the entire lecture, learning outcome by learning outcome by learning outcome. And it was really, really helpful to me. Now, I have to admit, after doing that somewhat earlier in my career and then moving into this role, I learned even more, particularly from Megan Kennedy and her incredible workshop on writing student learning outcomes. And I have now looked back at those student learning outcomes, and and they are not very, written very well. So another failure and flop, it was like understand this and know that. And those are huge no-nos in assessment because we can't really measure understanding or knowledge. We need to look at action verbs, like students should be able to describe this or write this or do an analysis. So if you do need help on writing measurable learning outcomes, Megan Kennedy is the place to go for that one. So that was failure and flop number 2, but I'm much better at student learning outcomes these days than I ever was before. All right, failure and flop number 3. I served as the course lead for the Psych 101 Common Course Assessment. And we worked collaboratively together early last spring to put together what we thought was a beautiful student learning assessment. And we asked students to reflect on something they had, a misunderstanding they had in psychology, and then describe how the course helped them correct that misunderstanding as part of a critical thinking analysis. Well, again, we thought it was great. We gave it to students. About a third or so of our students, they got confused and they didn't realize the misunderstanding they talked about in the first 2 questions was the thing they were supposed to write about in the second 2 questions. So we're like, okay, we better go back and rewrite this assessment so that it's clear to students. The other problem we ran into is we thought, well, we really want to measure student learning at the end of the semester after they've had the full exposure to the work that we did. And we also knew that a lot of misunderstandings in psychology happen in the disorders and therapy section. So we placed our course learning assessment in the last 2 weeks of the semester. And I will tell you, 25% of our students did not complete the assignment. And so, or at least that's when I pulled the data. Now that I say that, that seems super, super high. But anyway, I think that's correct. Anyway, so clearly by the last assignment, in almost the last week, students are maybe like, hey, I don't need to do this assignment, or I need to prioritize my time elsewhere. So as we are rethinking how to do that assignment, we are not only clarifying the language to make sure they're answering it properly, but we have decided to put it in at 2 points in the semester, roughly mid-semester, then end of semester, so that we can capture student learning, if not in both places, at least in one of them. So all of these, I would say, technically are assessment successes because we learned from them. But on the face of it, when we first looked at them, they were absolutely failures and flops. And as long as you learn from the process, it is okay to have failures and flops in assessment, because we certainly expect our students to be learning and growing, and that's not any different than the work that we should be doing as educators. So thank you for participating in assessment. And if you have a wonderful failure or flop you would like to share with me, please send it my way.